Hey developers! Today we are looking at Angular. Is the Angular framework hard to use? Is it easy to get started with Angular framework? We're going to answer those questions by creating a brand new simple Pokemon picker app that you can see here. We're going to walk through it with the latest version of Angular, Angular 11. We're going to see how it works with Tailwind CSS, how it works with components and routing, and see is basically how you create a basic program. So this tutorial is perfect if you are brand new to Angular or if you're a Vue developer or React, because you'll see exactly how it works. And I'll make sure to put links in the description below to different timestamps so you can jump around, kind of take a look at it. So I recommend staying all the way to the end and learn all about Angular. Hey, and if you've been following this channel for a while, you know that I have been doing a series of videos on different frameworks. I did one on React, I did one on Vue. We create this same app. It's called the Pokemon Picker app. And so what this does is it contacts a third-party API that delivers information on Pokemon. You can then filter different Pokemon by just typing inside the input box. And then any Pokemon you click on, it gives you a card and gives you some information about it, the front and back of it, and the types. And this is all created through this API. You can see here the routes at the top. We are using this different params in these routes to create this app. I am using in this app, we're going to create it with Angular 11.1. So that's the latest and greatest. And for those of you who are confused, there is an older version of Angular called Angular JS. It's pretty much been deprecated. Most companies have moved on to Angular. So this is the latest and greatest of Angular and not the older Angular JS. All right, and by the way, if you are interested in these type of videos, make sure you click that subscribe button and like button, and I'll put a link in the description to my mailing list. So if you want to get updated anytime I create videos, go ahead and sign up for it, and you can also get a free cheat sheet, which is cool. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in here. I'm going to turn off my camera just so that way we have a little bit more space and you don't see my big head. So let's begin here. So first, if you go to angular.io, they have a get started, and the first thing it tells you to do is to install the CLI. So to do that, so I have my VS Code, we just do npm install tacg at Angular CLI, and this will just take a moment to install. Okay, and after you install the Angular CLI, you can just do ng and then new and then the name of the app. So we'll do Pokemon app. And then it'll ask you a few questions on what you want. And by the way, we're assuming too that you already have Node installed. If you don't, just go to nodejs.org and install it. Or if you like, you can use something called Node Version Manager. We're not going to get that into this video, but it's also a way to install Node. And so it's going to ask you a question about setting up help and maintainability. I just hit enter there. I'm going to hit yes for Angular routing, and I'm going to choose SCSS. So you can see right away, it's sort of like the Vue.js CLI. It actually asks you a few questions, unlike the React one. After you choose this, it'll go ahead and create it for you, and this will just take a few moments. Okay, so we have the app installed, and I went ahead and moved to that directory in my VS Code, but we need to install a few other things. So I told you at the beginning, we're actually using a Tailwind CSS for our app, and I looked at some resources, and I found a pretty good article on getting Tailwind CSS updated. I'll make sure the link's in the description below. There's apparently a few ways to do it, and with the latest version of Angular 11, there was a few changes to Webpack. So you would want to definitely make sure you use a tutorial that's updated. I actually didn't see any official documentation on the Tailwind CSS site, so you'll have to kind of rely on blog posts. So really, the only thing you need to do is do this npm install. Well, there's a few things you need to do. You need to do this npm install Tailwind CSS, and then after you do that, that's just going to add it as a developer dependency. Then you're going to install this npm install Angular Builders custom Webpack post CSS. So make sure you have that installed as well. And after you have that installed, there's this huge Webpack config file. Essentially what it's doing is it's overwriting the normal Webpack config. That way it can do what it needs to do. So I went ahead and off camera, just to save time, I went ahead and did that. You just create a Webpack config.js file in the root of your app that you created. Don't worry about this ESLint error. And then you just copy and paste it inside there. That's all this text here. And then it asks you to run these commands on your command line. What it does is you just change where it says your project to the actual project name, and that would be, in this case, the Pokemon app. So it sort of looks like this. I'm going to copy and paste one of them into my command line. So You just do this ng config, the project.pokemonapp.arch, and you just kind of copy and paste it with all the different names. And what this does is it updates your angular.json file, and it just kind of points to your custom webpack. You can see here, it just makes a few changes to your custom webpack. So you have to do that for all 4 of these. So that will actually do that inside that'll update your webpack. So you don't have to kind of manually kind of hunt and peck through your Angular JSON and initialize it. Then the next thing you need to do, and once again, I did this off camera just to save time, is you run this npx tailwind init, and that creates this Tailwind config file right here. So it would just be like this, npx tailwind init. And that'll create it. And then the last thing is you need to copy and paste all this imports to your styles.css file right here. So you just copy and paste them in there. Then you save it and you stop and restart and you're all set. Now the directions actually goes into how to use purge. So if you wanted to, every time you build it, it could purge the Tailwind CSS out of there. But I went ahead and just not included that with this tutorial, because we don't care at this point. This is just a demo. So if you do all that correctly, you can then start your app. And to do that, you just do ngs. And what this will do is it'll start the app on localhost 4200. So let's see if it worked correctly. And like I said, the only thing I did off camera is installed those libraries from this here. So it should look exactly like it does just out of the box. Cool, so it went ahead and started. So if I open up localhost 4200, here is the app out just right out of the box. So we want to go ahead and obviously configure this. So let's take a look at what we have. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. And you can see here we have the app folder, and now we have this routing module, and that's because we actually created some, we did say yes to that we wanted routes. So let's see if we can create 2 routes. We're going to create a home route and an about route, and we want to make sure that they're routed correctly inside here. So what I like to do is it gives you this kind of demo of what it looks like just out of the box. I'm going to just delete all of it. And one thing I'm going to leave is this router outlet. And this tells Angular that you want to route to a certain place. And then I want to create a few folders here. Well, basically that's the outlet for the router, that is. So I'm going to create a components folder, and that's where we're going to create our components. And unlike Vue, you don't get this folder out of the box. You can kind of do whatever you want here. And so I like to have a components. And I'm going to create a models folder too. And we'll come back to that. So in the components, we want to create some actual components. Now there's a couple of ways we can do this. One of which is we can do the generate command. So the Angular CLI has a bunch of ways to generate code. I'll go ahead and show you how to do that. So if I wanted to generate component, I do ng, and let me make sure you guys can see that. Yep, so you can do ng, g, component, and then you want to put the directory it's going to be. So we're going to do components, and then the name of it. So let's start with home. And what this will do is it'll create this components home. And you can see all the files it created in our components folder. Home components, HTML, spec file, and TS. And it also updated the app module, which is cool. So it did everything for us we kind of expected. So here's the home works. Now I did create a spec file, which is our testing. I'm going to delete this. There's actually a command you can do to skip testing when you generate the files. And it created all this boilerplate for us out of the box, which is really neat. So that's how you do it if you wanted to create components using the generator command. It also did something really nice for us, is that inside Angular you have this module, and it's almost, a module is almost a way that Angular knows what's inside your app, and it knows how to compile things or not compile things. So you have to, in Angular, anytime you add a component, you need to add it into a module. Otherwise, it won't work correctly, especially if you add in other Angular things. So you can see here, it automatically, in the declarations, added in the app component, which came by default, and added that home component. So what I'd like to do is I can show you how to create this component manually. And I have done a few things to help us out. I installed a few Angular extensions I want to tell you guys about. First, this is a really neat one. It's called Angular Language Services. And it allows basically your templates to have that sort of autocomplete that you'll have inside your TypeScript files. So definitely highly recommend this, and I'll show you later how this works. And then I did this Angular snippets version 11 by John Papa. Once again, really well worth it because it just makes things way easier to create, because I'm going to create these new components using the Angular snippets. And then I also added in an Angular switcher, which I believe is called Angular to switch. And this one right here. And this allows me to switch between different files really quickly by using Alt-0, Alt-U, and if you're a Mac, you can see here, it's Shift-Alt-0. So now when I'm in this component HTML file, I'll just Alt-0, it goes to my TypeScript file. If I do U, it goes to HTML. So I can kind of quickly switch between the two, and I think P is the spec file. I is the SCSS file. So it's just a really quick and easy way to switch between files. Because what you'll notice in Angular, you split out by convention, you split out your TypeScript from your HTML and your CSS, or in this case, Sass. So I'm going to create a new folder here, and we're going to create one called about. And by convention, it's all lowercase. So we need to create 3 files. We're going to create an about.component.html, and then a new file called about.component.scss. And then finally, an about.component.ts. And then in our TypeScript file, this is where we can use those snippets I just talked about. So I can do a component and hit tab, and it goes in and creates this file for me. So it's a little, I don't know, I think this is a little bit easier than using the generator, and I don't have to stop and restart my server. You can also get a Angular extension for VS Code to do your generators too, but now right here, this name here, there's a convention too where you do app name and then the name of what you want to call it. So I'm going to call this app about. And now we just need to fill this in. This is the about component HTML. And since I do have a Sass file in it, I can do styled URLs, and that's a bracket, and it's called about.component.scss. And then I just need to change the name of this component here to about. So a lot of boilerplate, but this is essentially how you create a component. And you can always cheat too. You can kind of look at how this one was created, so you can kind of copy and paste how this has worked. Now, one thing we need to do is we need to manually add it into their app module. So now I can just do about component here. And by the way, it auto-detected where it was, so when I hit tab there, it went ahead and already added it into the imports at the top, which is nice. Now I want to see if I can get routes working. So let's see if we can do that. We have to go into our app routing module, and this is where we're going to put our routes. So let's see here. This array here is an array of objects, and we're going to have a path, and then we're going to have a component. And this component we're going to call first the home component. So we want essentially this home component to load whenever the app loads. And then the other one, we're going to have an about, and we're going to have an ID as our param. So this is how you do params with that colon and an ID. And we're going to do about component. Cool, so it auto imported both of them. And if we did this right, we should be able to route to it. But let's take a look at our app component HTML file. It's a very simple H3 Pokemon picker. And if we want to actually to route to things, we can do this router link. So here's this router link. And by the way, I did a-router link, and it auto-filled it for me. And you see there's this bracket, and it says router link. And then this will tell me what route I want to go to. So this is essentially like a directive almost in Vue. And if it has the brackets, that's essentially means that we're like binding it to something. So we can just say this router link will go to /. And this router link active is a way that we can have it so that that class gets added anytime the link is active, but we don't need to do that in this case, so I'm just going to delete it. And then I'm going to see about. Let's do another one, H2. I'll call this about. Once again, we're going to add another router link, but this we're going to go to about, and we're going to pass in 1. And so that'll tell it to go ahead and go to the first route in about with the about param. So if I did that route, it should work. Okay, so I have Pokemon Picker, homework's about. If I click Pokemon Picker, it goes back to the root, which I'm already at. So let's make this a little bigger. If I click about, cool. So it says about right here. So let's see, make sure that was right. So if we go to about component, HTML, about, let's do h2 about route. Let's see here, Pokemon Picker, about route. So cool. So we definitely see it's working correctly here. It went to the right route, it changed it, and everything looks fine. Now, obviously, that's not what we want to do. We want to actually show something good. And by the way, I'm going to hit my Alt-0 here. And let's see if we can show the params that are coming from the that route. So remember, we put /1 at the top. So we should be able to grab that. So I'm going to create a new class, a new item in here called, I don't know, we'll call it route param. And it's going to be, I think it'll be a type string. And then we're going to do this. This is where it gets a little tricky if you haven't used TypeScript or Angular before, because essentially what we're going to create is a dependency injection, and we're going to inject our route in there. So we're going to do private router, and we're going to use something called activated route. And you can see here when I hit tab, it added it in from Angular. And what this router does is it allows us to access the route. And we have to inject it into the constructor. And this is called a part of dependency injection, and allows us to access things really quickly inside our class. I'm not going to get into exactly what dependency injection is, but just realize anytime you need to like grab things in the Angular world, you have to kind of import it in through this constructor this way. So now I have access to this router, and I can do things like grab the snapshot and params. And by the way, you can see here from VS Code, I'm getting all the autocomplete. So I can do this dot route param equal this params, and then I got to put in the ID, which is the ID it comes from. And now if I go back to this HTML, like I actually type it right, I can now import this in. Remember I called it router param, so router param. If I route param, I misspelled it. Okay, and so it gave me an error, and it's telling me property route param is private only, so I accidentally left it private. One thing also with Angular, private can only be accessed in the TypeScript files, while public can be accessed in the HTML file. So I just need to change this to public. All right, let's see here. About, cool, it says 1 right there. So it definitely got it. If I put in just some random text. So now it is grabbing the data from the param and displaying it inside the template. Sweet, or inside the HTML. So we have now, I've gotten our routes, and now the next thing we need to do is literally add in all our HTML and CSS, so we can make it look nice and add in and make it look sort of like this. So what I want to do is off camera here, I'm going to add all this text in, just the HTML and CSS real quickly, and then I'll show you what it is, but I just want to do this quickly so you don't have to see me type. So they'll be back in 1 second. Okay, I'm back. All right, so I have went ahead and copied and pasted some HTML in our app here. So let me go first, and we'll start with the app component. So now the app component HTML, I just have this padding 14. You can see here's what it looks like. And then I have this name router link, and I just did a little flex center on it, made the text a little bit better, bigger, and made it yellow. So that's why it looks like this, because I'm using, this is all utility classes with Tailwind CSS. And then if you click on, if you look at the home component that's being rendered, remember this router outlet will look at the router module, and it says the default path will open up the home component. So now inside the home component, I just have this input with this text box, which I made like a little bit, some padding on it, some margin top, made the border blue, and had a border on it, and then I named it Pokemon input. And then I have this will eventually show all my Pokemon, so I just have this margin and just make it a little centered and make it a little bigger and blue. So that's why it looks like this. And so right now, it obviously doesn't do anything. And then my about component, let's say if I go to about /1, if I can do that right, /about /1, here's what it looks like right now. It looks pretty ugly. So the about component, it just has this margin 3/12 width, kind of centering it, this purple box with this deep shadow in the background, and then the text, green text, and then I have some images that don't show up yet because I haven't put the source on them. And then I have this Pokemon types where I just made this yellow and blue text. So that's what it looks like so far. So now we are ready at this point to actually start kind of doing what's really unique about Angular and see how we can connect and talk to a backend API. And that's where we're going to start with the home component. So typically what we want to do, just like in our finished app, we wanted to show the list of all these Pokemon. And so to do that, we need to connect to a backend API. So if you are used to, my other videos, you're probably thinking right now, well, okay, let's go ahead and use fetch. And fetch would be one way you can use to create a HTTP connection to somewhere. Oh, by the way, I do have this error here. Don't worry about this. It says my TSLint version on my workspace extension. You can actually turn on the workspace TSLint workspace extension and enable it, and that'll fix that little error. So I don't know why it comes up, but it's probably just something with my VS Code. So you would be right that you could use fetch, but really once again, we're going to use this word idiomatic way to use Angular is to use the HTTP client, which is built into Angular. So Angular gives you a lot of really cool things for forms, for the HTTP, for grabbing titles, and there's a whole bunch of things. So we're going to just look at how to use the HTTP client. So I'm going to start it off, and I'm going to create a private, because we want to do this privately. We're not going to have this in the template. We're going to call it init Pokemon data. And it's not going to return anything. So remember, this is TypeScript, so we're going to put a return void, and then we're just going to make sure we actually call it. Now, this ng on init is default to start. This is essentially our hook, and not really a hook, but it's a lifecycle hook that starts any time the component loads. So ng on init will get loaded as soon as the component loads, and it'll load this init Pokemon data. This is essentially where you put like your setup code. So now we actually need to talk to our backend, to this backend that we have. So I need to use some sort of client here, and what I'm going to use is this HTTP client. And once again, we're using constructor, we're using dependency injection, and you see here this HTTP client here. Now I could do control. There is a way inside Angular where you can hit alt dot, and if there's something it can autocomplete, it will try to do it. But in this case, it's not finding it, so we're going to have to just import it in ourselves. So that's going to be import in HTTP client from, and I believe it's Angular. I'm looking it up right now. Yep, Angular / common HTTP, 2 P's. And so if we did that right, cool. So now we have access to this HTTP client. So let's see if we can just, as soon as the app loads, we can console log it. And to do that, we're going to use this .http.get, and we're going to pass in our API. And I'm going to copy and paste this from another screen. And this is a public free API. They really should be paying me. Oops, I actually got rid of this. And at this point, this is actually typically an observable. So we're going to look at how it would work as an observable. But for now, we can actually just do toPromise. Well, what we can do first, if I do this right, is put this, and then there's this toPromise. This will make it in a promise, so I don't have to necessarily use it as an observable. But I do need to, I kind of want to do async await. So I'm going to await this. And I need to make this async. So I'm going to make this async. And now it's going to be complaining that it needs to be like right now it says it's a void. But now since it's a promise, so it'd be like a promise void. There we go. And then we're going to console log val, which will be really the data. So let's see if that worked. And we'll go back to our unfinished one. And we're going to look inside the console. Oops, inspect. and look inside the console. Oh, and it says right here, and this is a common error that you're going to have when you start working on Angular. You're going to get these weird null injection errors. And this should instantly let you know that you didn't set up the provider for it. So essentially you need to add this into the app module or it won't work. So I'm going to go to the app module, and inside the app module, we'll need to add it as a import. So inside this app writing module, we need to add in the HttpClient module, and now it should be available. So if I reload it, cool. So you see here, val here, we've actually have results. That's perfect. So we know that we're grabbing data. Now, one thing we should probably do, since we're using TypeScript, is we should probably have this data mapped out. And so we can actually use it inside our app and use the nice features of TypeScript and the autocomplete. And normally what you do is you create a model and you create an interface for that. I found a really easy, fun, quick way of doing this. So if I right-click on here, stores global variable. Now we have this temp1. I can do copy temp1. This copies it to my clipboard. And what I did is I installed this extension called JSON to code. So if I go to here and I search for paste JSON as code. Well, first what I want to do before I do that, I'm going to go to model. I'm going to create a new model called Pokemon.interface.ts. Now I'm going to do my Control-Shift-P. I'm going to paste JSON as code. It's going to take a second. And what this is doing is it's going to ask me the name I want of it. It's going to basically take everything that's copied into my clipboard, and it's going to create an interface out of it for me. So I'm going to call it Pokemon. Cool. So look, it went ahead and created the interface for me. I have this count next previous results, and it created the interface for results, and I didn't have to type all this in. That's great. And now what I can do is I can import this Pokemon interface into my home component. So if I go back to my home component TypeScript, I know that this get right here is going to be a type Pokemon. And since I did that, it automatically added the model interface in there for me. And now I know this val, I have all my autocomplete stuff, like the complete, the results, it's all there for me since I added in the type in for here. Now, what I'm doing right now is the simple way of grabbing information. I basically converted this observable over to a promise, but it kind of defeats the purpose of having observables if all you're doing is converting them to promises. So since I want to show you a little bit more advanced way of doing this, I'm going to convert this promise and actually use it as an observable. And think of an observable like a stream of data, and we can manipulate that data however we want. And so instead of doing to promise here, I'm going to pipe it. So we're going to pipe the data like a stream of data that we're getting from here. And really all I care about for right now is the results. So I'm going to pluck results. And you're probably thinking, what is pluck? So pluck is basically a way to grab certain data out of the stream that we're getting. So right now, if I hit Control Dot, by the way, it doesn't know what this is. So I'm going to have to manually add it into the top here. So I'm going to import this in. And this is all going to be from my rxjs library. So I'm going to do pluck from rxjs/operator with an S, operators. Essentially what this is going to do, it's going to grab the value. And by the way, I'm going to get rid of this await. We're no longer doing an async. And so it's now no longer returning a promise. It's still void. So I'm going to grab this pluck this results. And remember, if we look back at our interface for this Pokemon, it's going to basically take this results here and just grab it and get rid of everything else. And then what I want to do is I want to use this another rxjs, which is like another way we can kind of manipulate this stream. And we're just going to use this tap. And this tap is going to do a mutation for us, well, essentially a side effect. So what we want to do is we want to take the data from this. And if you look at this API, I'm going to copy and paste it here. And I'm going to paste it in here. Let's see if we do Control T. There we go. This has this URL here, and this URL has this /1, and this essentially is this URL is the same, but this 1, 2, 3 here always changes, and I want to kind of take this data, this 1, 2, 3, and save it in a special unique lookup table. That way later I can just look up the name, I can grab the 1 out of it, and then I can create I can send the URL 1 over to my about route so I can pull the correct Pokemon data out. So I'll show you how that works. So I'm going to use this tab, which I'm using to, essentially what I'm going to use this for is to grab, to make this unique table. And I really want the Pokemon results information out of it. So I can set a type for it. I'm going to look at the interface, and I called it result here. I'm going to change the name of this to Pokemon result. That means I'm going to have to change it here too, so it lines up. Cool. And now I can say this result is type Pokemon result, which I'm going to have to I did control dot there, so it went ahead and added it. And this is an arrow function. And by the way, it's giving me an error here because this is really an array. So it's an array of Pokemon results. And now I want to do this URL ID lookup. So I need to create another public, another value here. So I'm going to use, I'll put it right here. I'll do public URL ID lookup. And I'll just do cast it as any, but I guess essentially it would be a string for the name, and then a value for it. But I'm just going to leave it any for now. And that's usually a bad practice. You don't want to put any everywhere, but for right now we will. And for this Pokemon result, we want to actually create this URL, do this lookup. So I'm going to copy and paste this from another screen, and I'll explain what it's doing. So this is what this is doing is I'm taking the results, I'm reducing it, and I'm creating this new lookup table with the accumulator is being spread on here, so anything inside the accumulator is left in there, and then this current.name, and then the index. And so this will be a kind of a nice little lookup table. And then finally, after we grab this data, we're going to subscribe to it. If I get the right one here, this will be right here. We'll just subscribe to it, and this will actually return back some data, which is this going to be this Pokemon. Well, we'll do it like this. Pokemon results, and it's an array. And if we did this right, we should have a callback. And so anytime you subscribe to an observable, it triggers it. So as soon as this is subscribed to, it'll trigger this HTTP GET, and it should return some information. So I also want to grab a Pokemon result. So public, we're going to create we'll make it public, Pokemons, and we'll call it Pokemon result. And so now we can do this dot Pokemon equals data. Yeah, I think data will work fine right now. And by the way, you can see here if I do data dot, it could say this is an array. So obviously if I do 0, you can see here's a name and URL. So if we did this right, and I'll delete this console log val, we should be able to access the Pokemon data inside our HTML here. So to do that, we can do essentially like a v4. So in this div class here, I have this mt10 text to, or excuse me, this Pokemon here. It just has the one Pokemon in this anchor tag. But inside Angular, you have directives. So I can do ng for, and this is the for directive, just like in Vue. It's instead of doing v4, this is ng for, and I'll do Pokemon of, and what did I call it? I called it Pokemons. And by the way, you don't have to put a key here like you do in other frameworks. And now I should be able to grab the Pokemon name. And like I said, I have that Angular service that allows me to do autocomplete here. So look, I can do Pokemon name and URL. So look, it's right here. Now if I save it and I go back to my app, and I can go ahead and minimize this. Cool. So now I have every single name of all the Pokemon in here. And I went ahead and grabbed it from the back end. Sweet. We can also now do our router link. So in this div here, well, in this anchor tag, I'm going to do a router link. And once again, I'm going to just delete a couple of these. And this will actually go to my about. And then I'm going to use that URL ID lookup, and I'm going to pass in the Pokemon.name. So now this should go to the right place. So now if I click here, oops, I have an error. Let me see what I did wrong. Let me see here. Oh, I did this URL about slash. Forgot the slash there. So if I save it, and I click on one of these, cool. So it looks like it's routing to the correct place in my ugly text here. 3, 4. All right, so we're not done quite yet. One thing we want to do is be able to type something in here and have it filter the list down. So we have to do what we can do is we can create a filtered Pokemon list. And the way I did that is I did a couple of things here. I'm going to add in a public text, which is going to be the text of the actual input. And then I'm going to create a public filtered Pokemon. And this is going to be a Pokemon result. So once again, we're using types, so we can easily access stuff in here. And we should be able to, also we'll do one more. We want a public results, and we'll do Pokemon result. We might need this too. Okay, now I want to do, as soon as we subscribe here, I want the filtered Pokemon to be just basically the same thing in here. So we'll have it kind of equal 3 ways here. Oh, don't worry about this error. So now filter Pokemon and Pokemons, they're all going to equal this data that's being returned. Kind of think about it's going from right to left. So they're all the same. And now we need to actually grab the text. So I'm going to create, let's see here. I'm going to create a new public called onChange. This is a new function. It's going to return back some updated values, and it's going to be a string. And it's not going to return anything. So make sure, be good TypeScript people and put return values and everything, or put types and everything. And we'll just we'll do console. We'll filter the Pokemon. And now we want to take the filtered Pokemon, and we're going to take the kind of the list that never changes, and we're going to filter it. And this is just JavaScript here. And that's going to return the Pokemon.name.includes, and that's going to be updated value. And now we need to actually tell Angular to grab that data out of there, out of this input. And the way they do that is they have, just like in Vue, they have vModel, but there is ngModel. And we're going to add text there. And then there's also a ngModel change. And we're going to put that equal to the onChange event and then pass in the event. And you see there's a little bit of an error here because it doesn't know what ngModel is. And the reason it says this is because, once again, this is actually an error that's pretty hard to detect unless you know what you're doing, unless you worked with Angular before, because the Angular errors aren't great. So you'll see here in the console it says something about can't bond to ngModel. But that's because we need to actually add the forms module into our app module. So go app module here. There's actually, anytime you're dealing with forms or binding, you want to add in this forms module, and now it'll work. So now I'm typing in here, and let's see here, BLEB. So it's definitely updating this right here. So let me clear this console and type in stuff. You can see here it's running the method that we created, in the home component, but it's not changing anything on the screen. And that's because we're still using the Pokemon of Pokemon. So I could just change this to filtered Pokemon, and then it should work. So let's see if this works here. I'm going to get this a little bit smaller. I'm going to type in Bulbasaur. Cool. So you can see now it is actually correctly making this, filtering the list for us as we expected. So we are done with the home component. Okay, but we are not done yet. So we are getting closer, but we need to make sure when we click on one of these that it actually talks to the API and displays something in here. So let's go on to the About route. And I'm going to show you something really fun with async components and using stuff asynchronously. So we're going to assume that when we pass this URL, this to, that this URL is going to be, it's going to help us look up where we need to go to grab Pokemon information. So we're going to kind of do the same thing we did before. I'm going to go into my About component. And by the way, I'm no longer using this route params. And I'm going to do another init. So I'm going to create another init Pokemon data. It's going to be void. And I'm going to, once again, I'm going to grab in a constructor that we need. This time it's going to be this same thing as before. We're going to do private HTTP. It's going to be HttpClient, which it went ahead and added for us. This time it remembers since we had a different component. I'm going to get the init Pokemon data. And I want to just display it again. So I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to make this an async component just temporarily. And I'm going to wait. By the way, I need to change this to promise void. And I'm going to do const data equals await. This, well, we'll do this.htp.get. And now we'll have this URL. Remember before we had this URL here and we just had the only difference is 1. So we should, I'm going to copy and paste that URL from a different page. And we're going to paste it. And now we need to actually add the route ID at the bottom. So actually we will bring back in, I'll bring back in this private route ID, make it string. And then we'll do this dot route ID equals this dot router dot snapshot dot params dot ID. And now we can add it to this and we can do some string interpolation. And this is going to be called this dot route ID. And if we did this all correctly, we should have this data here. And I'll just call it like this. So let's see if this worked. And by the way, don't worry about this error. It's just it's some sort of type definition. It's, I don't know, you can put void right here and it would stop using it there. So we're back in here. Now this route loaded up real quickly. It did say there's a data, which is an observable. So that's not going to help us. Let's see here. Oh, because one thing we need to do, I forgot. We got to do to promise. All right. So now we see an error in caught error. So let's try this again. We're going to clear it. Go to Ivy. Okay. So in caught in promise, HTTP failure response 404. So I think we have a bug here. So let me see what I did wrong. If we go to the network tab. Oops, I actually found out what the issue is. I actually initialized this Pokemon data before I had the route ID, so it was giving it undefined. But if I try this again and I refresh it, cool. So now I have this whole abilities information, and this is the data returned back. So we're going to use the trick we did before. I'm going to store this as a global variable. I'm going to copy it into temp1, and I'm going to go back to my Pokemon interface. I'm going to go all the way to the bottom. And I'm going to use this paste JSON as code. And by the way, you can go to the extensions, and if you look at, it's just called paste JSON as code. It's just this extension right here. You can enable it and do the same thing I'm doing right now. And then, so I just search for paste JSON as code. It's going to ask me, I'm going to call this Pokemon detail. I'll do info. And cool, so it went ahead and created it for me. If I save, look, so I have all this Pokemon info, has all the arrays for me. It's really neat. So like this could have definitely taken me like 20 minutes just writing this all in, and it just did it all for me, which is awesome. So now I can go back to my home component, or in this case my about component, and I can add a type in here. So now I know for sure this is Pokemon info, and if I hit control dot, I can automatically add the interface. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a kind of a fun technique where I'm going to create a Pokemon observable and then use that inside my HTML. So typically in Angular, you might see something like this with a $sign at the end, which signifies like it's an observable. But I'm just going to call it literally Pokemon OBS. And then it's type observable, and it's going to return a Pokemon info, which is the interface we just created. And we have to do all this, otherwise we can't have our nice, cool auto-completion inside our HTML. So instead of doing async await here, I'm going to just change this to avoid again. I'm going to delete this async. I'm not going to have this await right here, but I am going to do this Pokemon observable and have it equal here. And I'm going to get rid of this data here. So now I have this Pokemon observable that I should be able to use inside my HTML, which is really neat. And if I go back to my HTML here, I can do something like this. So now inside this div, I'm going to do an ngIf, and I can do something like this. I can go Pokemon, and then do it async. And then now if I hear dot right here, look, I have all the information inside this this autocomplete from this TypeScript, because I created this interface for it, which is really neat. But this is kind of, you have to, everywhere now I'm using this Pokemon observable in HTML, I'm going to have to do this right here. I don't want to have to like type in Pokemon observable with the bar. You do this bar async, this tells it basically the HTML that's an observable, and you can use it. So I could do a quick thing like this, but I'm going to do this as Pokemon. And if I get rid of this, cool. So now I can use Pokemon anywhere inside this component, and it's basically this observable, this async observable. So now instead of having some Pokemon, I'm going to use my observable, basically Pokemon, which we just call it Pokemon. And then if I do dot, look, I have name and order. So it actually has the information that I expect from here. So I'm going to call this name. And now we can go in and add in source for these images. So I'm going to go into this source here. And this is going to be a Pokemon dot sprites right here. Dot front. I'm going to do the front shiny. And once again, I'm going to have source here. And once again, my really cool autocomplete is there. So I'm going to do Pokemon dot, and it's going to be sprites. And now I know it's back shiny because it's pretty much there for me. Awesome. And now I'm going to do an ng4 here on this div. So I know that there was a lot of information in here, and I want to grab this Pokemon types, and it's an array. So I can do let type of Pokemon dot types. And if I did this right, I can now grab the types out of here. So type dot slaughter type. So we're going to do type, and that has a name. If we wanted to, we could also like put the URL in there. That's probably not going to help us. We can do type.type.url. So let's take a look if it works. All right, here it says grass, and it has the URL for that one, but we don't want to care about this URL, so I'm gonna delete this. And I'll make this a little smaller. So here's our types. So if we go Charmander, here's the pictures. It says fire. Cool, we've done it. We can also, I don't know, filter it out. Here's our Venusaur. Let's see, Pidgeot. Cool. All right, so we have completed it. So this really is the power of Angular, since we're using TypeScript, is to do things like this, be able to have auto completion inside our HTML elements here by doing that, and then also working with observables, and then inside our home, like doing this tap and this pluck and filter, and just really change the information as it comes in. Like a lot of that is Angularisms that I think are really cool, that makes Angular a neat framework. Like obviously you can do this in Vue and React, but you're gonna have to get the rxjs operators, rxjs library inside, and no one does that. Not many at least, but it's pretty powerful. And if you think of your data as streams, you can do a lot of neat things with it. So that's it. I will put a link to this code in the description below. Let me know what you guys think. This was a lot of information. Here, I'll turn on my camera again so you can see me. So this was a lot of information I went over in the last 30-40 minutes. So let me know what you think. Leave a comment below. Is Angular something you're going to use in the future? Let me know. Thanks. Bye.